Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us on today's webinar. It's all about Giving Tuesday Now, how our response to COVID-19 will redefine how society operates. I'm Nicole Jones from TechSoup, and I'll be your host today. So I'm very happy to see a lot of you here with us today. Before we get to our content and to our presenter, we're going to cover a little bit of housekeeping. So all lines are muted, but you can ask questions anytime by typing them into the chat box on the bottom right-hand side of your screen. But it's better, actually, if you put your questions into the Q&A section, which is right underneath your slides. If you lose your internet connection at any point, no problem. Just reconnect using the link that was emailed to you. And lastly, you'll receive an email with this presentation, recording, and links so you can go back and watch anything that you might have missed, and also share this content with others who weren't able to join. And there's going to be lots of opportunities to engage with us on this webinar. Some ways you can do that is by one, chatting with us in the chat box of this webinar platform. And if you navigate over there right now, I'd love to hear, where are you joining us from? I'll read out some of those responses in just a moment. Another way you can engage with us is if you respond to poll questions during this webinar. We've got one question and our post-event survey. It really helps us to plan for future content. And you can do that by navigating over to the tab located at the top of where the slides are showing. And lastly, tweeting at us at TechSoup and using the hashtag TSWebinar and GivingTuesdayNow. We'll make sure to include those in audience chat so you have those readily available. And thank you so much for your attention. I know there's lots of different things that are currently fighting for your attention. So your engagement here really makes a difference, and we appreciate your questions that you ask along the way. And with that, a little bit about TechSoup, a global network bridging tech solutions and services for good. More than 1.2 million nonprofits in 236 countries and territories have benefited from TechSoup and recognize TechSoup as their unique resource partner. And to help make this possible are the 100+ corporate donors and providers of software, hardware, and services who have chosen the TechSoup platform to create and grow impactful in-kind donation programs. You can check out all of their great offerings by visiting the nonprofit tech marketplace at TechSoup.org/get-product-donations. And no need to memorize that. We're going to include that in the audience chat, and we'll also send that in our post-event email. And I also want to share a special resource page over at TechSoup.org for nonprofits impacted by COVID-19. So we're committed to equipping your nonprofit with the technology resources that you need to meet your mission, serve your community, and support your staff. And that's why we've compiled resources from tools to support remote work, webinars like this one, related blog posts, free courses from TechSoup, and more. And we're constantly updating this page with new resources. We'll share that out in this chat. And that's also a great page to bookmark. And now time for introductions. Today we're joined by Woodrow Rosenbaum. He is founder and CEO of With Intent, an international consumer marketing agency. Woodrow has a long history helping companies and brands to define strategies, develop new business, and expand their markets. As a data and insights lead on the global Giving Tuesday team, Woodrow works with donation processors and other stakeholders around the world to evaluate donor behaviors using his experience in consumer analytics to uncover the levers for increased individual giving. And we're joined by our fantastic TechSoup marketing associate, Stephen Davidson, who is going to be assisting on chat. And with that, I'll hand it off to Woodrow. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Nicole. It's a great introduction. I appreciate it. It's really a pleasure to be on your webinars, and there's a lot of interesting work going on right now, so I'm very excited to talk about it. I will be talking about Giving Tuesday in general and what we're doing with Giving Tuesday Now on May 5th, as well as some of the kind of broader themes and learning opportunities that are surrounding both that moment as well as our current situation. So again, thanks for having me. I'm working now as the Chief Data Officer for GivingTuesday, and my role is to not just measure the movement, but to understand what there is to learn about generosity and how to motivate more of it around the world. And we've got a lot of data and insight that does come from GivingTuesday that helps us to achieve that objective. But this work now also encompasses teams in 47 countries and over 80 collaborators in the U.S. working in 9 working groups to look at all angles of this question of giving behavior, including donations to nonprofits, but in a broader context of the many ways that we support community and one another. And it would be really helpful actually to start to get a sense of how familiar the audience is with GivingTuesday. So we have a quick poll, and I'm hoping, Nicole, if you get that up, that we can just get a sense of where you guys are, our audience, in your awareness and understanding of GivingTuesday. I promise there won't be a quiz, but it helps me to kind of gauge how much detail I should go into in terms of the movement and its background.
So that survey has launched and responses will come in shortly. Just real quick, want to know who we have joining us. We've got Howard from Los Angeles. Hi, Howard. Laura from Racine, Wisconsin. Kay from Boise, Idaho. Betty from Tucson. Tamara from Tallahassee. Great. We've got all the coasts, both sides of the coast covered and in between. So great to have you, and we've got some responses coming in.
Yeah, I would say I'm not a data scientist, but I play one on TV, and I would say that we have a pretty good sample size, and there's clearly some a pretty strong level of understanding of what GivingTuesday is. A vast majority of you responding that you're somewhat or very familiar. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the background and history of GivingTuesday. Of course, if you have any questions, you're welcome to post them at any time. We'll have some time for Q&A at the end, but I may address some of your questions if they're directly related to what we're talking about as we go. So feel free to interrupt. So I think we're probably on to the next slide, and hopefully you guys are seeing it as well. As it sounds like most of you know, GivingTuesday really has grown from a day to celebrate giving and giving to nonprofits in particular into really a year-round generosity movement. And we are looking to inspire all forms of generosity. There are over 225 community campaigns across the U.S., GivingTuesdays in 70 countries. And obviously there was a lot of donation action last year on the day, but increasingly this is about a network of communities and individuals coming together to celebrate generosity all year round, which becomes particularly pertinent in our current environment. So just some top line highlights from last year's GivingTuesday. We estimated that at least $2 billion roughly was donated on GivingTuesday in the 24 hours just in the United States. That obviously is a pretty big day, and there was lots of other action. Roughly, well, at least 13% of the American adult population participated in some way. I'll talk a little bit more about that participation later, but again, it's really important to understand that this is more than just a fundraising day. There's many, many different ways that people get involved, including advocacy for the causes that they support. But we're seeing substantial growth every year, including in years when overall giving to nonprofits has either been in decline or at least has been consolidating, which is a trend that we're seeing pretty consistently year over year now, where we have fewer and fewer donors contributing the majority of the financial support. And we're seeing the opposite on GivingTuesday, and that's one of the reasons why we and our partners like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation are so interested in studying what's going on and around GivingTuesday, because we are seeing a counter trend to some of these troubling overall trends. So we're trying to understand how can we leverage that for better and more giving all year round. And that brings us to today, because it was in that environment of thinking about how do we engage people about their giving, and how do we engage the social sector about inspiring support all year that we ended up with the current pandemic and the related crises. And obviously, as we watch this unfold, we're seeing a lot of suffering, we're seeing chaos, a lot of uncertainty, and really an unprecedented situation. And throughout this, really from very early on in the evolution of this crisis, we were also really inspired by the upswell of generosity and giving that we were seeing and the collective action happening all around the globe. There really appears to be also an unprecedented response. And we thought, this is our initial role here really is to help these people who are looking to connect and looking to help them lift up their own communities despite their isolation, despite being distanced from other people and their loved ones, despite the fact that they're dealing with their own uncertainty. We saw them organically creating these moments and that spontaneous upswelling of action being shared and replicated and really catching on. These are behaviors and actions that we've been working hard to mobilize all the time. And so where that ended up sort of taking us is we realized that there's a role for Giving Tuesday to play in capturing this and helping to maximize its impact. And so we talked to our movement leaders, both in the U.S. and around the world, and key partners that we work with, and decided really at the end of the day to do what we do best, which is to help to galvanize a response to this unprecedented moment, not to at all replace what was going on, but really to give it a rallying cry moment. We wanted to be thoughtful about how we did that and recognize for many that there would be challenges, but we decided that on balance, there was really an opportunity here for a massive collective spike in generosity, citizen engagement, and business philanthropy and activation, and ultimately for support for communities and nonprofits in the U.S. and around the world. So that's why we created this Giving Tuesday Now moment in order to capitalize that. And in many ways, it is simply the usual kind of approach to Giving Tuesday, but in this environment ends up kind of playing out a little bit differently, which I'll share some details on. So our belief is that generosity has the power to unite and heal communities, and that's true whether we're in good times or bad. And on May 5th, this is our kind of emergency response to take that strength and amplify it as much as we possibly can, with a goal to take advantage of the opportunity of the world coming together to not just mitigate the crisis, but to chart a course through recovery and toward a brighter future, in fact, because we see opportunity here for positive change in cultures of giving, in giving behaviors, and in the practice of the social sector. And so we're very optimistic, actually, about what the potential positive outcomes are there. And we're working with some key partners in order to be intentional about that, because there's also a lot of risk and there's a lot of uncertainty, and there's no question about that. Our partners are coming together in lots and lots of different ways with creative activations, connecting with our network of actors and resources. They're providing funding through them, with communications and outreach, new technology solutions, many, many different approaches. This is not about us creating a fundraising day. The fundraising is largely already happening. We want to amplify that, and we want to make sure that we are taking advantage of every other possible angle into this problem, because although we do think the opportunities are there for strong positive result, we also don't think it's necessarily just going to take care of itself. We think we really need to be collectively quite intentional about how we do that, and our partners are there to, from the beginning, really have ramped this up with a matter of days. We went from early conversations on this to fully launched with those launch partners that you see. This doesn't necessarily mean that every organization is in a position to participate. Every organization is different and responding in different ways. What we do see, though, is that people are looking to organizations and communities to help them stay connected and to heal. And And it's really important to understand that the way we're seeing different organizations engage in Giving Tuesday Now and leverage the opportunity really is as varied as the people in those organizations. So for some, this is just straight up a fundraising opportunity. For others, it's about adding another dimension to their current appeal. And for yet other organizations who are maybe struggling to figure out how they get into this narrative and engage for support in this challenging circumstance, this gives them an opportunity to make that need clear, to talk about how the vital role that they play in community, but also to give back and to be part of that healing. And that's the idea, is that May 5th, Giving Tuesday Now gives us that, all of those organizations, that sort of pivot point, that inflection moment to achieve those objectives. So we're not, there is no, just as there always is on Giving Tuesday, there's no one way that everybody's going to do this, and there's no one sort of format that you must conform to. But we do have our community campaigns across the U.S., about 225 of them that are activating in various ways. There's also our what we're calling kind of our national and global affinity group, like Giving Tuesday Military and Giving Tuesday Kids, who are going to activate their networks for giving and celebrate the work that's already being done. We're also seeing mutual aid networks and professional networks like social workers and lawyers and therapists, and we're being quite active in how we engage with how those networks can network with one another and how we can help to amplify their results. So the next kind of level of this is that we really want to ensure that collaboration is effective and available to organizations that are interested in getting involved, and working with our platform partners is one of the key ways that we do that, through webinars like this, through toolkits that they create, through case studies, and a lot of this stuff then we curate and amplify on our social media channels, and through the Giving Tuesday Now website, where we have lots of these resources for organizations to figure out how they can get involved, whether it's direct fundraising or kindness initiatives, community education, resourcing, maps and crowdsourcing, just lifting up stories of community resilience, and convening the communities through a shared kind of experience, the town halls and Q&A, this kind of thing. So this is not meant to be the end. It's meant to be the beginning of this action, or in fact, the middle of this action, where we are injecting new energy and new collaboration into the current marketplace, so that we can come out of this with even more momentum and strength as we work toward recovery. So just to give you a little bit of background on how we're looking at that learning experience, as I said, we really think that there's substantial opportunity for some upside here, but it's small consolation to organizations that are struggling so much in the moment. And so we see this as kind of a multi-phase process. But first and foremost, we recognize that there's a real need to identify where the opportunities are for scalable mitigation, to help plot that course through recovery. So we're working to understand what's working now, where can we and our funders and our other networks lean in to support the mitigation of the worst aspects of this, and by that we mean all areas. We mean the health crisis, we mean the social crisis, and we mean the financial crisis that our social sector is facing. So understanding that we need to focus there first, so that we can then move into a kind of the recovery phase. And we want to have a good understanding to help the social sector plot the course through that recovery, identify where the risks and opportunities are, and capture those best practices that capture the new levels of generous behavior to really see that we can, as much as possible, realize a positive legacy from this crisis. And that in part means cultures of giving. It also means adopting new best practice. And one of the already impacts that we are seeing of the crisis is that a lot of organizations are adopting best practice that isn't really new, but is absolutely that much more critical right now. And some of the things we're hearing from our platform partners, for example, is enormous numbers of small to mid-sized organizations that are finally really getting ramped up for our online giving, because that's the only kind we have right now, right? So really trying to tap into technologies to support that. TechSoup explained to me that they're getting lots of more requests for software tools to help organizations deal with remote working, that sort of thing. So already we're seeing that that need is generating more adoption of mechanisms and approaches that ultimately we hope will actually add resilience into the sector. And I guess the other thing that we're seeing in terms of that sort of requirement for best practice is how people look at Giving Tuesday. Because we've been saying all along, you really should be thinking about Giving Tuesday as a moment in a broader conversation, and that you shouldn't make it transactional. And where we are now really makes that non-optional. For one thing, we announced this Giving Tuesday with only about a month's notice, right? So it's not like it's been on anybody's calendar for months. And interestingly, although there's clearly challenges in ramping things up, the fact is what that does is it forces you to think about where can I plug into this opportunity as part of what I'm already doing. And that's the right way to be looking at Giving Tuesday any time of the year, is where are the opportunities to amplify something I'm doing or provide an additional dimension. So for example, some of the really big organizations that are out there fundraising for the direct health response to COVID around the world, they're using Giving Tuesday now to not ask for money, but to celebrate successes, to thank the people on the front lines, to celebrate the heroes, this sort of thing, right? To add another dimension to their conversation, to make it more inclusive and less transactional. Those are best practices that we should be practicing all the time. And it also means that this doesn't have to be a heavy lift. If you're looking for an opportunity to launch something new, Giving Tuesday Now is an amazing opportunity for that hook. But it doesn't have to be net new. It can just be a moment to amplify the conversation about what you're already doing, or again, to add that other dimension. So some of the way we're approaching this need to kind of understand the situation in order to provide actionable insights, we have a number of kind of new measurement initiatives that we're launching. So we're doing a lot of social listening and media scraping to see what are the conversations about giving, what do they look like in the current environment. So what conversations are taking off, what do people care about, and we're working with our platform partners to understand how that's connecting to actual action. We'll also use this as a really important experimental opportunity by injecting certain interventions, experiments, calls to action, and conversations on different topics. We can see how that progresses, how it leads to collective action, how that propagates through various networks, so that we can get a good picture of kind of what people are thinking about and what they care about. To help round out that view, we have survey research that we've launched already in about 10 countries. We're doing multiple rounds of surveying in those countries to understand some key metrics of philanthropic intention, how people are feeling about their giving, and self-report action that they're taking, not just donation, although including donation. And that's very important component of kind of understanding the psychological impacts of the crisis, but also how that's affecting people's desire to give and overall values and attitudes around generosity. And we'll overlay that with data on things like the progression of the virus, the social and economic impacts, and how people are feeling about their finances, to get a really good picture of how supporters are feeling, how givers are feeling. We're already seeing that data come in, and there will be some interesting highlights between now and Giving Tuesday Now. Then we're also looking at direct giving behaviors. So we're on the ground in those, in at least those 47 countries where we have data initiatives, and with our 70 global partners, and tapping into our community network, the community movement network in the U.S., working with our platform partners to aggregate and measure the actual things that people are doing. And the goal here is to really understand trend more than empirical levels. So we want to be able to see kind of how things are shifting and where we think things might be going. And that includes analyzing just direct donation transaction data. We have substantial data sets of longitudinal data to work from, and we're getting new data from our partners on a fairly ongoing basis. And in mid-May, we'll be doing a really in-depth trend analysis. And we already have some interesting indications of where the opportunities and threats might lie. I mean, one of the things that is clear from looking at past data is that the nonprofit sector is pretty resilient. That when you look at past economic downturns, that by and large the nonprofit sector is not proportionally affected and recovers more quickly than other sectors of the economy. That's obviously small consolation if your little nonprofit goes out of business, or your big nonprofit that is really reliant on earned revenue just can't pay the bills. So, you know, you have to survive in order to recover. So it's certainly not to suggest that there are major challenges, but there are significant mitigating factors. In the last recession, we saw donor-advised funds provided quite a substantial buffer on the overall impact for nonprofits. Research by Dan Heist and Danielle Vaughn really showed very clearly that those funds kind of provided a rainy day fund, that the grants from those funds rose substantially. And those donor-advised funds, the value of them have grown enormously since 2008, 2009. So we do see that as a mitigating factor. And then in addition to that, there's just the fact that people are clearly looking for opportunities to give. One of the things we're investigating right now is there is a disconnect between what seems to be an unprecedented injection of individual and institutional giving, but at the same time organizations that are really struggling. So we're trying to plot that very carefully so we can help particularly those institutional level funders to understand where organizations and subsectors might be falling through the cracks, but also to help those organizations and those subsectors understand where they can bridge that gap potentially. And this kind of ties into something that I think ties into our other examination of Giving Tuesday itself, and the fact that people are generous, and that generous people tend to give. And one of the things that was clear from our earlier research is that people are looking to engage in multiple ways. That they increasingly want more than just a transactional relationship. On Giving Tuesday, we see that the vast majority of donors also take some other action. We see that most people who participate in more than one way. And we really think that, again, this is an indication of a best practice and a way of engaging that we need to embrace, and it's that much more urgent now. People will have less money to spend, and we do expect a suppression in individual giving in the longer term if we're really looking at the financial potential impacts that appear to be on the horizon. So understanding that multiple engagement mode is really the way we should be engaging supporters is absolutely critical. We can't, it's just non-optional right now. And we know that diversity in funding sources and types of engagement adds resilience to organizations. So it's really important right now to give yourself that diversity as much as possible. That's what's going to maximize fundraising results. And so as we move through this sort of peak, this spike in giving behavior, we should be thinking about how do we continually engage people in the ways that give the kind of involvement we see in Giving Tuesday supporters who after Giving Tuesday tend to increase the frequency and value of their donations. Giving Tuesday donors are more Giving Tuesday acquired donors are more valuable than donors acquired at other times of the year in aggregate. And the reason for this is how they're being engaged, not because Giving Tuesday has done something magical to them. So capturing that and really understanding that that is 100% going to be a critical way of navigating what could be a substantial suppression of giving, of individual giving, is really going to be important moving forward. So just a couple of things to consider when you're looking at setting something up and using Giving Tuesday Now, but just as you think about how your organization is going to engage for support during this crisis, offer multiple ways to give. Tie that engagement to your relevance in the moment. Like, every organization has a COVID story to tell. And we're already seeing that there's a trend in individual giving toward organizations that are not dealing with the direct or even indirect impacts of the crisis, but people are rethinking who's in their community. And community-based organizations that are suffering, arts organizations, these and even small businesses and employee groups and your neighbors. We're seeing an upswelling in the U.S. Of individual giving in those areas, and I think that this is both an opportunity in the moment to mitigate some of the worst impacts because people are looking for those opportunities to give back, but also an opportunity to really capitalize on that, leverage it for some shifts in longer-term culture of giving, because people are much more cognizant of who it is in their community and who they want to support. So I've got a couple of other things I want to get to, talk some additional information about Giving Tuesday Now and how we're rolling out. But I think we've got a few questions, so maybe I should get to a few of those questions first. Nicole, maybe you can help me out with that.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see. We have some people who arrived late, and they would love if you could talk again about how Giving Tuesday Now works, and maybe like what makes
Sure.
it a little different from the typical one at the end of the year.
Great. Yeah. So in some ways, this is the usual Giving Tuesday model, right? It's all forms of giving. There's no one way to participate. There's no requirement that you do it any particular way, and you just engage your community for support. I think the key differences here have to do with the timing, and that we rolled this out as an immediate and emergency response, which just means there's less opportunity to put a whole campaign together, and it's not necessarily meant to be that. Certainly there are organizations that are doing that, but the idea really is that this is an inflection moment with whatever you already are doing. So for those that are already campaigning out there in a big way this spring, this is an opportunity, for example, to just have a mid-campaign spike instead of a mid-campaign slump. It's also very much not just about raising money. Obviously, there will be lots of organizations that leverage it for that opportunity, but many, many, many examples of organizations engaging, telling their story, and lifting up stories of generosity. And there's no wrong way to do that. So really, it's the usual Giving Tuesday, maybe a little bit of a kind of lighter touch approach because we're rolling it out kind of in the middle of this, and without a lot of lead time.
Great. Another question here, Woodrow. Just a reminder to everyone who is listening to please share your questions with us, and we'll take some time to answer them now and as the presentation wraps up. So with that, we've got another question. How can we take advantage of Giving Tuesday now, knowing that people are clinging to their purse strings and worried about themselves? It's a great question.
Yeah, it is. So, I think a couple of things. Right now, in this moment, the initial indications are that people are not being particularly reticent to give. That our platform partners are reporting to me that giving is up, up, up. So first of all, it's very interesting that financial uncertainty typically correlates with lower levels of giving. Our initial data from survey seems to suggest that although that's true, there's a lot of positive pressure in the pipe. So despite the fact that people are financially uncertain, there's a lot of interest in giving and a lot of giving happening. And that seems to be transitioning through it was mostly to the direct health response related organizations. Then we saw it really coming into those organizations dealing with the secondary effects, the homeless shelters and the food banks. And that's still, both of those are still very strong, particularly the latter. And what we're seeing emerging now is people giving within their communities and a lot of local giving. But I'm hearing from higher ed fundraisers or fundraising platforms, things like, some of my clients decided to move their appeal to later because they didn't want to bother people when they were worried about their money. But the ones that kept their fundraising are doing way better than they did before. So I think actually that there's a lot of interest in giving right now. I do expect that to wane as we get through the peak of the social and health crisis and into potentially more of the financial impact. So I do think that we're going to see that slump. One of our objectives here is to try to get more momentum going into that so that we're mitigating it somewhat. But I think that most of the indicators are right now are people are actually primed to give. You have to be sensitive in your messaging to where they are, but this is another really, really important reason to give people lots of ways of engaging with your organization that aren't just transactional, because that's one of the best antidotes to feeling like you're asking somebody for money when they're stressed, is give them other ways to provide support. And the good news there is that's the best way to get more money out of people anyway.
I like that approach. Yeah, giving alternative ways for people to give, right? Whether it's money or donating time. There's definitely that insurgence of online volunteers right now who are stepping up to help with different nonprofit needs in a variety of ways. That's a great point. Why don't we take another question? I know I see some other ones flowing in here, but let's take this one from Samuel. A little specific about an organization, but I think I've seen this question pop up in multiple webinars in the past, and it could be tied to other organizations as well. So the question is, what or how would you advise small arts organizations and museums that are closed and not generating revenue and are too small to develop new engaging content online like bigger organizations are?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I have a few thoughts on that. First, I think that there's an opportunity to tap into the fact that people are thinking local right now in a big way. That really seems to be at this current moment, and things are changing very fast, but at this absolutely current moment, people are thinking very local. So it's an excellent time to remind people of your role within their community. Secondly, I would say play to your strength, right? If you're an arts organization, if you're a museum, the fact is your content is your greatest strength, even if you can't do, the Met-style opera broadcasts. What I think that what's interesting there is that you might have an opportunity to both really make the case to your community where you live, with slightly less slick, but still content based on the value you provide into that community, but also to experiment with getting that out a little bit more broadly, right? To tell a story about what you do to a broader audience and leverage that content, even if it isn't quite as slick or highly produced, with an audience that's a little bit outside your local area, because it doesn't really cost you anything more to do that. And I think one of the things I would do if I were at an arts organization is I would think about telling that story in a way that I talk about the arts are clearly one of the ways that our communities around the world are looking to heal themselves and get through this crisis. Right? Just think about, Italians singing on balconies, right? So that I would look at how I could amplify that and contribute to that. So try to blur the line between giver and receiver a little bit. Our arts organizations have a vital role in helping us as a society and as a community get through this together. So start doing that now, and I think you'd find that it was an excellent way to well, like they say, like, don't tell me you're funny, make me laugh.
Those are great points, Woodrow. Thanks. And I do see some questions, so why don't we get back into your presentation, and we will take some time at the end to finish answering.
Sure. I just wanted to say a couple words about an experiment that we're trying that may get developed a little bit more depending on the results. We stood up something really quickly that we're calling the Starling Fund. So starlings, if you don't already know, are those birds that congregate in enormous flocks of many tens of thousands, and they create really incredible patterns in the sky as they fly around and somehow miraculously don't smash into each other. And it turns out that the reason they don't smash into each other is that each bird just sort of orients itself on 7 other birds. And then you have these little mini networks of 7 birds that are connected to all those other mini networks of 7 birds. And together they make this really impactful thing. And that's really how we think about Giving Tuesday and our network of actors and that's how Giving Tuesday grew into something really quite substantial and big around the world, is not some kind of top-down giant movement or organization, but as a movement of micro networks all interconnected. So we wanted to leverage that, and so to celebrate this and to try to address the fact that a lot of our communities and global teams just have very, very few resources. We set up the Starling Fund. It's a micro-granting fund. We are setting up, the first round is done. We're setting up $250,000 in tiny little grants to catalyze some movement experimentation, innovation, and activation around Giving Tuesday, GivingTuesdayNow. And one of the things that we're doing with that is not just for the direct impact of trying to catalyze the activation in those places, although it's certainly that. We're also measuring how the model itself is effective and how these investments propagate through the larger network and community. So this will be something that we look at with our funders on an ongoing basis as a potential more formalized mechanism for microgranting. Sorry, I was just looking at a question that came in about amplifying voices of people with lived experience in Giving Tuesday communities. I mean, I think the answer there is to ask them. You know, the thing about Giving Tuesday is that it's not a campaign; it's a platform, and it is built on people who kind of raise their hands to say they want to get involved. And that said, I do think that as those of us who are in this network, this Giving Tuesday network, and are making it grow, we kind of have a responsibility to recognize that if we just wait for people to raise their hands, they're largely just going to look like us. And so as a team, as a global team, we've really been working very hard at identifying where can we find those other networks that already exist so that we can invite them in, as opposed to try to just build it ourselves or just build it from the people that we touch directly. And I think that identification of those players in other networks who have that lived experience and have credibility within those networks of people with lived experience, that is the place that's the way to form those connections and lift up those voices. So there's a question here about our PR efforts. So we're working with NBC and MSNBC. They're going to be sort of lifting up a bunch of content. So they're picking up stuff that we surface from the community to broadcast. The Guardian likewise is dedicating some space. We're doing some targeted online and social engagement, although mostly we are ideating campaigns with the Gates Foundation, PayPal, Facebook, some of these other big players who can bring a big megaphone to it. And our partnership in those is largely just to help craft those campaigns and identify how they can activate their large platforms. I see there's also a question here about the timing. Yeah, I mean, the picking May 5th, well, picking any Tuesday in a time frame that made sense was certainly a challenge. One of the things that I mean, there was no perfect day. We were looking essentially to activate as soon as we could get key partners on board and get the basic sort of MVP platform ready and resources. And so ultimately that just kind of by default became May 5th. It was just as fast as we could effectively move. Also looking at the various each week that was available, there wasn't really any perfect answer. What we're finding is that those that have something else going on at the time or otherwise connected, for example, Hispanics in Philanthropy has a Cinco de Mayo activation that integration, right? So because Giving Tuesday is not a giving day, the way other giving days are, it's a moment, it's a movement, and it's a platform. You can really kind of make it work with whatever else you have going on. So if, for example, you're doing Cinco de Mayo and that's a way to have a celebratory environment around this, and that's what your community does, then there's an opportunity to leverage it as such, which is exactly what Hispanics in Philanthropy are doing. There's a question here about the hashtag. I mean, the hashtag really is just to help ensure that you're kind of in the conversation and leveraging that moment. We're already seeing that there's a lot, we're getting a lot of traction on Giving Tuesday now, and as everybody's voices start to help to amplify the brand of Giving Tuesday Now, there's going to be it's an opportunity for you to make the connection between this big global reaction that the entire international community is getting behind and whatever it is that you're doing, which we actually have clear data on. Is that's part of the magic of Giving Tuesday any time of the year. It's this great combination of being able to connect with something I care about and that is in my community, but being part of this giant global celebration, that is in fact one of the reasons why Giving Tuesday does provide that amplification moment. So I don't know if there were any other questions, Nicole, that I should be covering here.
Yeah, a couple other questions came across. So how do you think Giving Tuesday Now and the crisis will affect the regular Giving Tuesday campaign that happens at the end of the year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, because I'm the data guy, I'm supposed to have the answer to this, right? As well as just what's going to happen with individual giving this year. I don't know. The answer, the truth is we don't know. And in fact, when we looked at our data and 990 analysis that we did using tools that we developed last year, we see that there are some patterns in past shocks to the system, certain patterns around things like 9/11, other patterns around things like the last recession. But I think that they have limited utility in their predictive power right now, because this is different. It's bigger and worse, and it's bigger and better. And so it's very difficult to know kind of how that nets out. Our goal is to maximize the opportunity. The other thing, though, that we are doing is that rather than say, well, we looked at the last recession, so you can expect this in individual giving or this result on Giving Tuesday, what we're doing instead is saying, well, what were the indicators of various risks or opportunities in past situations? And then we'll look at our data on an ongoing basis for those signals, so that then we're able to say, well, look, what we're seeing is this signal that in the past has indicated that arts organizations who get 30% or more of their revenue from earned revenue are in danger of failure, or there's an opportunity to engage individual donors in this demographic cohort, so that we can at least sort of try to be a little bit proactive as we see the emerging trends. But honestly, I don't know how this is going to net out at the end of the year. I don't know how Giving Tuesday is going to net out. I really think we need a lot more data before there's any chance of making those kinds of predictions.
Thanks, Woodrow. And just a reminder to everyone, we still have time for questions, so keep them coming, and we'll go ahead into our question queue here. How do you suggest the environmental sector use GivingTuesdayNow? This is a question from Coralie. I'd like to know as an opportunity to support other social sector orgs.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think that there's, in the absolute immediate, I think that it's fairly true that if you don't have a COVID story, you're not relevant, but everybody has a COVID story. I think that idea of support of other social sector orgs is really interesting. And one of the things that we see on Giving Tuesday much more than other times of the year, but that I think that there's a real missed opportunity for, is more collaboration between organizations and even within subsectors. So I think that that's probably on the right track, is to think about who can you partner with and demonstrate that that value of togetherness is really compelling to supporters, and a great opportunity to have a reason to tell your story.
Great. Our next question here is from Robin, and this is a good tactical question about how does the hashtag work? Do we put a link on our giving page to it? Is it better to put a donate button provided through Facebook? What would be your recommendation on that, Woodrow?
Yeah, I mean, I think there is no one answer except that reduce the friction as much as possible. So the hashtag is an opportunity to be relevant and part of this movement and conversation. So use it in your social posts to connect to the brand and the idea. If you ask for what you want, that's really important. Make it easy for people to then complete that, whatever it is, but especially if it's a donation. So a donate button on Facebook, sure. A donate widget on mobile, absolutely. Something on your website, like the mechanism is not what's important. What's important is you need a compelling message connected to the movement that's about your value as an organization, and then making it very clear and really easy for people to complete whatever action you're asking for. And those are the right components. The actual tool is not that important.
And this is a good follow-up question in terms of what's the best way to leverage global. Oh my gosh, I'm like looking at the hashtag GTN at Giving Tuesday now as part of a longer term strategy.
Well, we're going to be pivoting post Giving Tuesday now into really continued stories of generosity and action and conversations and holding up those examples. And I think that essentially that's the right approach for any organization as well. I mean, the very first opportunity you have post Giving Tuesday now is to say thank you. And you should 100% do that. And then think about what is your ongoing story. I think too often in fundraising, we think about our fundraising moments as these standalone events, and they don't need to be, nor should they be. They might be extraordinary spikes in the conversation, but they should be seen as part of the conversation. So continue to talk about what you're doing, what your organization's value is, how you're giving back in your community, how you're connected, and how the support you're getting is delivering on that. In fact, I think by and large organizations should think of their relationship with donors as the organization is the mechanism for the expression of the donor's care and generosity. So talk about what your donors are accomplishing.
All right, thanks, Woodrow. We still have some questions here. Let's see. If you want to look at the lineup of questions, Woodrow, if one's calling to you.
I'm back in the having a little bit of scrolling issue. How can I land trust supported by individual donations? Try to fundraise when ER services and food banks can provide direct help to those affected by the crisis. Yeah, the latter is more urgent. That's true. I think what is fascinating to me is how much people are standing up in their communities, and we're hearing again, from our platform partners, that people are giving local, they're giving to the organizations that they feel are part of their community, both geographically and otherwise. And that includes things like small businesses. So there is lots of ways to be relevant. And although we may see that wane, I think if you get out there right now, you're going to find that people are actually really inclined to help you. Here's another question. I'm the chair of a regional association finishing a survey of membership on the impact of COVID-19 on our members. Are there resources that can help support me in documenting the impact on members and be proactive in supporting them? Yes. I mean, not knowing the full details of that, there's certainly other associations in our network that are interested in answering some of those questions. And I'd say our data collaborative is interested in any findings and themes that are emerging from this current crisis and understanding of what it means to any player. So start with us. Let us know what it is you're doing and what you're learning, and we can help to find both an audience for it as well as resources or collaboration to support it if that's what's needed.
Great. Why don't we take one more question real quick before we do see a comment from Kathy saying thanks for doing this webinar, and that it'd be great to have another one of these with a panel of 3 people who are on the ground in organizations about their campaign plans and how it relates to their recent experiences and fundraising. That's great feedback, Kathy. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, hearing straight from nonprofits and how they are experiencing this is absolutely important information that we all need to be in the know about. So thanks for sharing that, and we'll take that into consideration. So let's see. What do you think, Woodrow? One more question?
Sure. What should we answer?
How about, let's see, we've got this question from Michael. I'm the marketing coordinator from Capital Roots, a food access NPO that works to provide healthy food at cost to people who can generally not afford it. Our workload has doubled each week, and the crisis has gone on while our fundraising events have been canceled. So the question is, how do we extend our donor network nationally when our focus is inherently local?
Yeah, I think that is really going to be challenging. I think there are 2 things that come to mind. One is, can you get some kind of virtual fundraising going, even if it's a low lift, just social media appeal? But talking to people where you're local, when you're in the fight right now is the best time. So I understand the need to cancel events, but what can you do? I would absolutely 100% start with that, like a Facebook campaign in your town. Then the next thing I would think about is there must be hundreds of you. So what can you do to connect with 100 more organizations and do something collaboratively that is nationally focused? So those would be kind of 2 top of mind, what I would think. I would just answer one more question, Nicole, before I hand it back to you. Yes, I'm in Toronto, and the Canadian team is awesome, and they're standing up initiatives from coast to coast to coast. It's just like everywhere else in the world, it's fairly MVP, but Canada Helps is behind it, and Give for Three Foundation is behind it, and the Rideau Hall Foundation is behind it. So GivingTuesday.ca is all you need to know. Go there, hit the contact button. They will help you get involved.
Great. And with that, we've wrapped our questions. Thanks to everyone who has asked them. And we're going to now move into our share and learn. So just share one thing in the audience chat that you took away from today's webinar. That'll help us understand what was most important to you and also be feedback for future webinars. And also, we're going to have a post-event survey. So before you leave, you're going to get prompted to take a survey. So please, it just takes about 20 seconds. And again, that also helps us prepare and create future content. And also, you can follow us on social media, and you can visit the TechSoup blog for lots more resources. And at TechSoup.org is where you'll find all of our upcoming webinars, and we've got a great list next week. One on how to choose the best fundraising and donor management system. There's one on Slack for nonprofits, And then the following week, we will kick things off with crowdfunding in our climate and also how to raise money using Zoom for virtual fundraising events. You can check out the full lineup on TechSoup.org/community-events, and we also have a list of all of our past webinars there as well that you can replay at your convenience. And just a couple more resources for all you change makers. So you can check out our TechSoup courses. It's a social learning platform that provides nonprofits and libraries with just-in-time solutions-based training. And you'll get 10% off a TechSoup course of your choice by attending this webinar. Just use the code FY20Web10, which Stephen will supply in the audience chat, and we'll also include that in our post-event email. You can also learn more about the range of services that TechSoup offers to help your nonprofit better implement and manage your technology. So from emergency tech support to strategic planning and fully managed IT services, our offerings are designed to meet the needs of all types of nonprofit organizations. I'm just going to wrap with this last piece of resource that we've been continually building on. It's a resource page for nonprofits impacted by COVID-19, and again, includes things like tools to support remote work. And I saw that someone asked, I think actually over email, about a template for remote work policy. We do have a template available on this resource page, and we'll also be sharing that via audience chat and in our post-event email. It's a good page to bookmark to see the new list of resources that are regularly coming out. And with that, it's time to say goodbye. Thank you so much, Woodrow, for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Nicole.
Always a delight, and we look forward to seeing you all on a future webinar. Have a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.